Today on In Your Face Anatomy, we're learning about the bottom of the skull.
So next up, we've got the bottom of the skull. So we're going to look at all of the bony features on the bottom. So let's turn our skull upside down, and we got all of this stuff going on. Lots of good stuff. Now, one thing to remember is everything on one side of the skull, we also find on the other side of the skull. So it's really just half the skull that you have to learn because it's a mirror image on the opposite side. So on the bottom of the skull, it starts out with the styloid process. So the styloid process, we always just think of as the stabby little styloid is how we remember it, because it's always a little process that projects outward into a point. So it's sharp, and we find several styloid processes throughout our bones or throughout our skeletal system. We've got some on the skull, we've got some on the radius, we've got some on the ulna, etc. So lots of little styloid process. So we're really looking for the sharpest thing on the bottom of our skull where it comes to a point right there, that little pointy part near the back of my skull. This is my styloid process. Easy to spot, comes to a point, boom. So a process is a projection of bone where the bone just kind of juts away or juts out from the rest of the bone. Then I've got my mastoid process. So the mastoid process is the one you can feel behind your own ear. If you feel the bone back there, it's a blunt little process right here at the back. This is my mastoid process. So there's my styloid process. Here's my mastoid process. Then next up on our list is our stylomastoid foramen. Now we know that foramen means hole. Styloid process is here. Mastoid process is here. So we're just looking for a hole in between my styloid and my mastoid process. If I turn it over, there is my stylomastoid foramen. You can see that little hole there in between styloid and mastoid. So this is an easy one, stylomastoid foramen. Then I've got my occipital condyles. So remember, all of the back here is my occipital bone. So the condyles are on each side of my foramen magnum. It comes up to a little bump here. You can feel it if you rub your fingers across it. This is my occipital condyles. Then I've got my external acoustic meatus, which is just my outside ear hole. So just think about where your ear should be. There's one hole in this area. This is my external acoustic meatus. Then I've got my incisive foramen. So our incisors are our front teeth. Front teeth, those are our incisors. So we're looking for the foramen, and it's going to be right behind it. This here is my incisive foramen, the hole behind the incisors. Then I've got my median palatine suture. So with palatine, we're talking about the palate, the hard palate specifically at the top of our mouth. And we can see running right down the middle of our palate, we have this little groove. This is my median palatine suture because it just links the bone through the middle of my palate. Median palatine suture. Then I've got my mandibular fossa. So let me grab my mandible real quick. There it is. So with my mandibular fossa, we know the mandible is our bottom teeth. There's my mandible attached. So what I'm really looking for is where does this mandible plug into my skull? So we're in the bottom of the skull, and we can see if I put my mandible on, it's where this bone comes together. There's a little indentation right at the back of our zygomatic arch here. That little indentation, my mandible is going to come in and fit there. We call this little indentation for the mandible the mandibular fossa. Mandibular fossa. And then I've got my carotid canal. So the carotid canal is a little tricky. What I want to do is flip back over, go through my jugular foramen because my jugular and my carotid travel together. So if I flip it back over, I can see where my jugular foramen comes through. I'm going to immediately turn around, and right there, boom, that little foramen right next to it on the underside, this is my carotid canal. But it doesn't go all the way through on these models, but we can get the idea of it. So jugular foramen, carotid canal. Remember, your jugular and your carotid travel together through the venous system. All right, so that's the bottom of the skull. That's pretty easy. Most of this stuff we already covered when we did the inside of the skull. All right, good luck.